We were considered freaks. Of course, we didn't see ourselves that way. It was the rest of the universe that was crazy. I mean, who would have thought that planets with liquid water could support life? Liquid water, you might as well go swimming in liquid nitrogen. So there we were, silicon-based COVID creatures in a carbon universe. The only reason anyone bothered talking to us was that we could manufacture their star drives at a fraction of the cost. That's probably why they were the slightest bit civil, though you could always tell they just wanted you gone as fast as possible. We kept to ourselves as much as we could. Like most sapient beings, we are social creatures and would have loved to acquaint ourselves with these strange, cold people, but their hearts were as cold as their worlds. No sooner would we enter a system than we'd be informed that unless we had something to sell, we should leave because their habitats couldn't be adapted to our needs. Early on, we didn't mind. We assured them that we had our own ways of compensating for the vast gulf in comfort zones and requested they give or sell us somewhere relatively isolated where we could handle the installation. Then came the excuses. Your generators are too high energy, they'd say, and if one malfunctioned, it would be a catastrophe. We ran simulations that showed it wouldn't be worse than one of theirs blowing up, but still, it was too risky, and suddenly they didn't have any isolated areas. Soon enough, we got the hint, gave up trying to make friends, and settled for making money. We were used to our galactic status as useful freaks by the time humanity entered the stage. Psychologically speaking, they were not too different from any other species, more rambunctious than most, likely because they were still new to the larger universe, with all the energetic curiosity of a child. We were sure they'd calm down after a century or two once the amazement wore off. We didn't get much gossip, but even we noticed after a while that these humans were unusual. Instead of growing up and taking their place on the galactic stage, they continued to explore for the sake of exploration and engage in activities considered hedonistic and wasteful by the galactic community. The humans responded to this attitude with the same maturity they always displayed, which is to say they extended their middle fingers, a gesture of extreme insult, if my memory serves, and continued as before. Having met a few of them, I think they took a certain malicious pleasure in spitting in the eye of authority. We got here by following our desire to explore and discover, they said, and now that we're here, you want us to adopt an attitude that would have kept us planet-bound until the sun blew up. No, thanks. Or something to that effect. I've never been good at remembering speeches. It was inevitable that we would run into each other, if only because their starships needed replacing, and we had cornered that market long ago. In retrospect, we shouldn't have been so surprised that it went the way it did. They had heard of us and been warned away, but when you need an engine, you need an engine. And so I found myself in front of a video screen with a human. Like all carbon life, they looked bizarre, though at least they were vertically symmetrical. Apparently, my appearance was even stranger to the human than it was to me. It leapt out of its chair, cursing vehemently and invoking a deity, as per established protocol. Both sides of the exchange were muted, and the translators were the only conduit for audio, but I didn't need a direct line to know that the human was yelling at its fellows, though to what end, I could only guess. The only noun it was using was untranslatable. In less than 10 minutes, close to 20 humans had gathered around the screen, all of them using that untranslatable word in reference to me. I quickly tried looking it up in the wider interspecies dictionary, but it must have been a human-only word because I couldn't find it in any available version, and the dictionary of human languages was woefully incomplete. Eventually, they calmed, and the one originally assigned to communication spoke. I apologize for that. Your appearance took me off guard. The human's tone was far more respectful than any I had ever heard. No offense taken. You were looking for a replacement part for your engine? Yes. Our alpha catalyzing ring is getting corroded, and we wanted to replace it before it was too far gone. Still, that note of respect, how strange. Understood. Would you like us to install it, or would you prefer to do it yourselves? The human's mouth twitched upwards on one side. You probably know more about what needs doing than we do. If you're willing to install it, that would be fantastic. The other humans started murmuring in excitement, seemingly about how amazing it was that an untranslatable would be working on their ship. I nearly broke protocol to ask for a definition of the word they kept using, but at the last second, my brain caught up to my mouth, and I finalized the schedule for the repair instead. The repair went reasonably well. Their alpha ring was indeed badly corroded and would have blown out after their next jump. So, we replaced it and sent them on their way. I was puzzled by their attitude but put it out of my mind as an anomaly to look into later. It was only a year later that the next human ship pulled into our yard. I was on communications again, deeply torn between established protocol and my curiosity about what they saw when they looked at me. The burly human's eyes seemed to grow twice their size as it looked at me. Well, damn, if Jose wasn't telling the truth, there's real untranslatables in the universe. Habit locked down hard, I requested the purpose of their visit. It was a simple repair, so simple that I was fairly certain they had deliberately sought out our shipyard to verify whatever they had heard. Not long after that, we began to get human ships on a fairly regular basis. While we weren't very far off the popular route, stopping at one of our yards unless absolutely necessary was all but unheard of. Naturally, some of us began getting suspicious that either humans were up to something or one of the other civilizations had put them up to something. What they were up to exactly depended on who was telling, but every theory suggested a different agenda. For the most part, I ignored the half-schizophrenic ramblings of the rumor mill, preferring to research all I could about human culture and history in the hopes of coming across the word they kept using to describe us. But I had little luck. I became fluent in their lingua franca, though given the physiological differences in our mouths, pronouncing anything was next to impossible. It appears those fleshy flaps in front of their teeth play a large role in all their languages, lips, I believe they are called, which makes intelligent conversation more difficult than it's worth. I rather wish I had found the courage to ask for a definition sooner. It would have made what happened next far more understandable. When the human ambassador arrived, the yard erupted in panic. That a species had regular contact with us was unheard of already, but that one would actually send someone to talk was treading the border between a fever dream and outright impossibility. By that time, I was the one with the most experience in dealing with them, so I was naturally chosen as the one to receive the ambassador. Gulp. I remember rather vividly that my biggest concern was that the pressure would bring out my stutter. I was fairly sure I would die of embarrassment if that happened. The human was clad in an environmental protection suit, naturally, and it was bulky enough that I couldn't be sure whether the ambassador was male or female. I hoped they wouldn't be insulted if I used the wrong pronoun. We had long ago scrapped the position of ambassador ourselves. No one was willing to get within miles of one of us, and their lack of cooperation meant that the most any other sapient saw of us was a video screen conference, and that itself was rare. Most preferred text communication, all the better to ignore our existence. So there I was, the chosen representative of our race, or at least of our yard, which happened to be the largest of its kind. Thinking back, that's probably why the humans made contact there. They, like most peoples, put quite a lot of importance on size, assuming something large must be important because large things require more effort to maintain, or something. We regard large things as a necessary pain in the rear, preferring to have several moderately sized things to a few large ones if all other things are equal. There's some saying in their lingua franca about eggs and baskets that refers to that kind of situation, but the exact phrase eludes me. I was vaguely familiar with their gestures, so when the suited human inclined its head to me, I knew to return the motion. Welcome to the Heek Yard. I am Kaki, and I would have the honor of accompanying you, if that is agreeable. Of course, said the human. We have much that needs to be discussed, and I would like to start as soon as possible. I hoped that I was simply interpreting a benign comment in the worst possible way, but my stomach began clenching nervously. Then please come this way. I led the human to the room that had been set aside for the purpose of this conference. Once the human was settled on the bench adapted to its shape, I asked the purpose of its visit. To be honest, we're a little uncertain ourselves, the human said. You see, it's not every day that one comes across something straight out of legend. My understanding of human psychology was elementary at best, but I'm fairly sure the human ambassador was deliberately dropping hints for me to pursue in the next question. But I still had no idea what these hints meant or what to ask about. I'm not sure I understand. Well, we've been going through the records we have, and you match all the descriptions we have of the untranslatables. I mean, you've got your head, body, and limbs, but there are no visible joints, or at least none in the right places. And where are the eyes, or ears, or mouth? It's like something out of a fever dream. I knew instantly that the ambassador had seen right through our attempts to blend in. Did it really not know that we had all of those things, just in different places and, in some cases, smaller sizes? But you probably want to know what I'm talking about, don't you? You see, we're not quite sure ourselves what to believe. The stories are so old, and some of the descriptions border on the ridiculous. The records say that your kind used to be in contact with us back when we were just barely starting out. The oldest stories depict you as gods and demons, and it just goes on from there. I was glad to be of a race that didn't sweat. If I had been, my shell would have been dripping. The implications of the ambassador's words were terrifying. The general consensus among our people was that the decision to cut off contact was made some centuries before we had discovered other sapients. Something about carbon-based getting repeated several times. We were reasonably sure that our isolation had been a deliberate choice, but we had no clear idea why. All we knew was that the first ships to make contact with carbon-based life had been attacked on sight, and we had slowly integrated ourselves into the galactic community under very strict conditions. The old stories told by humans bore a startling resemblance to our own mythology of the lost colonies, and we had long been resigned to believing that those colonies had died in the attacks, not bothering to mention them to the other races. But now, suddenly, one of those lost colonies had come knocking at our front door, and there was nothing we could do about it. This was the first time we'd had any contact with our long-lost cousins since the separation, and I had no idea how our people would react to the news. I was rather certain that panic would be the most immediate reaction, but the long-term effects were harder to predict. All I knew for sure was that the status quo had just taken a major hit, and I was right in the middle of the storm.